Hello and welcome to another episode of the Outdoor Gibbon podcast. As you will see that this is a slightly different format to our usual podcast. That's because these two are a very special set of episodes. There are two episodes coming up and they were recorded at the Stalking Show 2025 and we did them for the BDS, the British Deer Society. There were two panels that were run on the Saturday and the Sunday, and this is panel 1, which was recorded on Saturday around about 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock, and it was a topic about deer management. Are we getting it right, and are the standards good enough? The session was to explore whether the current deer management strategies are fit for purpose, consider the government's role and interventions, and assess whether the training standards are keeping pace with modern demand. The panel was made up of John Thornley, a member of the DMQ, Paul Childerley of Childerley Sporting, Sandy Williams, a former deer management coordinator of High Weald, Floris Lassie, a deer association of the Netherlands, and Louise Farmer, an independent deer management specialist. You'll have to bear with us with the audio. It was a great struggle to actually try and get something recorded that was clear because the environment I was trying to record in was incredibly noisy with dogs, people, children, all sorts of things going on. I think there was even a chainsaw going on in the background. So I've tried to clean it up as best I can. Now, realistically, this was for people that were either at the show that struggled to hear because the PA system wasn't particularly good, or people that actually missed it and really wanted to see it. I'm sure this will raise many questions, and I'm fairly sure at the end of this you'll have more questions to ask. We will do some follow-up podcasts answering some of those questions and looking into those questions because I know it raised questions with me that I need to get answers to and dig deeper on anyway. So have a listen, see what you think, and we'll catch you at the end.
Right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for joining us for this panel discussion today. The main topics for today are really to talk about deer management strategies and training here within the UK. I've got an illustrious panel. We had a couple drop out, which looking by the seating plan is probably a good thing, otherwise we'll be getting very cosy. But I'd like to welcome all the panelists who've joined for today's discussion. We're all looking forward to hearing your thoughts and insights on the topic of deer management here in the UK. And I think also from deer management experience from Holland as well. So I think I'm going to ask you all to introduce yourselves, just give a little bit of background on yourself and also just your understanding of deer management strategies, because clearly we have differing approaches even within the UK, and we're seeing Scotland is much more advanced on this, I think, than England is at the moment. But I'm going to hand over in no particular order. Paul.
Good afternoon, everybody. Paul Childerley from Childerley Sporting. Obviously, I do a bit of filming as well, but a lot of people don't realise probably that we actually cull and manage a lot of deer with clients. So we're doing about over 1,000 deer plus my own stalking as well with clients. It's a lot ahead of deer to shoot in the season. I've been doing this for 25 years with clients, and I've seen a lot of changes in the industry for the better, to be fair, whether it's training or whether it's more people like yourselves getting into it, and the growth in the whole industry with shows like this. So yeah, can I pass on or do I keep on going?
Thank you. My name is Sandra Weirton. For the past 3 years, I've been a deer management coordinator for the High Weald National Landscape, which is down in Sussex. We've had a few projects over the past few years, one in particular, which was DEFRA funded, over a total of 26 square kilometres of ground, where we actually got some DEFRA funding to get thermal drain surveys undertaken so that we had a better idea of the numbers of deer present. And we also had funding for carcass payments to try and help offset the cost of shooting deer. And we've got some data that shows for fallow deer, it costs you about £50 per deer when you take out your time and expenses. And as we all know, game dealer prices fluctuate, so that is one of the issues that we try to address with that. Something that we found through our project, and one of the main benefits of it, is that we've managed to get some really serious collaborative deer management going across the area, and that's mainly through setting up WhatsApp groups with stalkers to try to get them working all together, so that you can do coordinated days when you're all out with your own individual bits of ground, moving deer around, and, you know, making the most of the time spent on the ground. We've found over that 3-year project that we've doubled the number of deer that are being culled. And one of the interesting things with the drone survey is that it shows that there's a massive bias towards female deer. So we've probably got 75% female, 25% male. And as we all know, if you're trying to manage a population, that is a major issue.
Hi, I'm John Thorne. You'll notice I've picked the prime position on this stage between two lovely ladies. I'm chair of DMQ. I also chair currently the Deer Initiative Partnership. I'm author of 1 or 2 books on deer management, and way back in the 80s, as co-author of an old book called Fair Game, Protection of Wildlife and Country Sports. So I've been involved in deer-related issues for a long time, and was a member of the original group that put the England and Wales best practice together, and I'm currently involved in the review of that best practice as well. In terms of my views about deer management, my own opinion is one size doesn't fit all, depending on the species, on the area. Clearly we've got a problem with fallow deer, particularly difficult to manage for lots of reasons, as many of you will well know. So I look forward to talking with you and listening to some of you speak as well, in terms of whether we've got it right, in terms of one of my pet subjects, in terms of training and qualifications. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Oh, it's a bit loud, sorry. Louise Farmer, I work for NatureScot. I am the Wildlife Management Best Practice Officer that covers the whole of Scotland. So lots of different species, lots of different habitats, and my role is to facilitate and deliver the development of best practice. And the biggest project that I work on is Wild Deer Best Practice, which have been going since 2003. And so I've got the time and the position, and luckily the funding through Scottish Government to be able to put events on and develop best practice further. So before working for NatureScot, I was with BAST, and before that I was teaching 10 years, lecturing in game deer management. So my roles over the last 20 years have all been focused on improving standards and education.
Floris Lassie from Holland, from the Dutch Deer Society. I've been stalking through the UK since 1984, and Holland is a complete different game because it's, of course, very small. We've got a lot of infrastructure, we've got a lot of rules, and we've got not too many deer, but to get them properly is a challenge, especially now the antis are very heavily disturbing our shooting programs. So it's interesting to talk with you about how to arrange your programs after all the internal programs of what beast to kill and when and how.
Right, thank you all for that introduction. I think as an interesting starting question, it would be good to get the perspective from the panel, particularly given your experience in Holland, your experience in Scotland, on deer management strategy, because there it's much more centralized, and clearly here in England we don't yet have a so centralized deer management strategy. And I suppose leading on from that, do we think we need one here in England, or do we feel we're doing a good job already? I think it would be interesting for us just to hear a little bit more about what the sort of how the deer management strategy is led by government in Holland and how it's enacted.
Yes, thank you. For starters, I think it's very important to make your goal clear. Why do you want to manage deer populations? And is it because you've got too many, you want natural regeneration? Is it because you like to stop, you would like to make a business out of it? Is it because you want more biodiversity? That's a hot topic in Holland, probably here in Britain as well. We as British Deer Association, we're changing our view, because what we now want to do is see what does the deer bring to the environment, and what does the environment bring to the deer, and get a proper interaction. Very easy to say, very difficult to realize. The other thing is, and that's a big problem, we get tickets for deer to shoot. So we have to count, especially count casualties, damage, stuff like that. And then we have to explain that to our local county, and they give us a certain amount of tickets to shoot roe deer, red deer, wild boar. We don't do one checks in Seco, of course. And the antis, they try these applying. So they just say, no, you haven't proven enough that deer are an issue in Holland. Right? They're not doing as much damage as you say. And then they bring it to the judge, and the judge says, well, as long as it's under the hammer, you can't shoot. So we've got large areas in Holland where we can't cull our deer. And that's very disturbing. And that's mostly to do because we get the allowance, because we look for damage. Damage is our goal, our drive to cull deer, to manage them. And we want to change that to deer management, population management. Is that your question answer?
And Louise, maybe you could just give a little bit of perspective from Scotland, because clearly there's been much more government-led initiatives in terms of deer management. I think when we read more, because I think they're well advertised. But the sort of direction of travel you see happening in Scotland, because I think as we sit here in England, there's definitely a view that could be coming down the track. And is that something that we want to see adopting? And also, just what is the basis for cull targets that they set in Scotland? Because we all hear they're very aggressive, but what is that based on?
Thanks very much. One thing we chatted to earlier, Hugh and I had a chat before we started. I think one of the main things that are important to identify is just how much change has actually happened in Scotland over the last 5 years or so. I've been in my current role for 2.5 years, and I've seen change in legislation. We've seen new bills. We've seen consultations. There's a lot of change, and making sure that we have our practitioners, that we have our deer managers on board with that has certainly not been easy. So communication has been really, really important. We are only ever going to see more change, I think, in Scotland. It seems to be coming month after month, potentially new proposals. When it comes to looking at the reasons for shooting more deer, obviously Scotland have got a huge focus on biodiversity improvement, and that message seems to be coming louder and louder from Scottish government. Fortunately, deer are, without the pun. They're in the crosshairs, unfortunately. Populations are going to have to change, and certainly when it comes to the policy in Scotland, you mentioned about one size doesn't fit all when it comes to deer management. In Scotland, possibly similar to England, but we've got open hill stalking, we've got stalkers, recreational stalkers, potentially in forestry areas in the borders. It's such a diverse selection. It's a mass melting pot of people with different land interests, different species, a different access. Some people have got access to larder, some people haven't. It's just such a variety, and that has been probably one of the hardest conversations to have, is to make sure everybody's on board with the changes that are happening. There's quite a few projects that have been going on in Scotland. The Common Ground Forum has been very successful, which has been an open forum for deer managers to actually have opportunity to, in a constructive environment, talk about their concerns and how that will be listened to by government. So it's very proactive, but it certainly hasn't been an easy to get to the stage that we're at.
Thank you. I think that's a really important point, that when government's legislating from above, the people enacting on the ground actually get the opportunities to feel that they're being heard, because ultimately they're the practitioners and they need to be heard. So it's quite an interesting point that you make there. And Sandy, just if we look at just England now, clearly here in England, deer management strategy is left to landholding by landholding. I mean, Forestry Commission have an input, but ultimately it comes down to the landowners and what policy they want to follow in deer management strategy. But it'd be just quite interesting to hear, because what your role was as deer management coordinator, how did you find bringing estates together worked in terms of getting the outcome and getting the estates to work together?
Our project, we managed to get just over 80 landowners on board. And obviously, every one of those had slightly different ideas of what deer management should be for them. But I was reassured that you can do things. We were dealing with fallow deer, but you can coordinate things at a landscape scale. I mean, how many people in the audience think we do need a deer management strategy for England? Yeah, a reasonable number. Personally, I do, because one of the main issues that we found with the fallow deer is that you do get landowners that don't want to engage at all with deer management. And, the deer euphos grounds, I hate to use the word sanctuaries because it sounds so lovely and idyllic, but they will use those areas to hide up and make deer management across that landscape very difficult. One of the things we did was actually invited landowners that didn't want shooting on their ground for any reason to allow us to walk the deer off the ground to do a coordinated cull, and that seemed to sort of work with some people. But I think we do need legislation on board, and it's, as John and Louise have said, it's not a one size fits all. Certain species of deer are issues in certain areas. It's not right across the board. And that's why you need a strategy to focus any resources in those areas where it's needed. But yeah, we did the consultation, didn't we? It ended in 2022. So 3 years later, you would hope that a strategy would come out for England, but maybe moving later and see what happens in Scotland.
And then Paul and John, just as practitioners on the ground, and I imagine with, like, for instance, Paul, you've obviously got a commercial operation, but in the same breath, you have a deer management strategy. And how would you feel if that was being legislated for by government above in terms of how you manage the deer on your ground?
Like you said, basically, each plot of land, estate, farm, everybody wants their deer managed in a separate way and depending on species. So it really boils down, I find, to what they want to achieve at the end of it, whether it's the biodiversity, the trees, or they want a commercial outlet. And basically, a lot of the states now want a commercial outlet for their deer, whether it's venison or whether it's people coming in commercially shooting them, whether it's a syndicate or people come from abroad. For me personally, I think mudjack are a little bit of a problem, and fallow deer in certain places are a real problem. There's obviously debates about going forward with night licenses and trying to keep the numbers down. But I've experienced quite a few times over the last several years of the holding ground, the non-shooting areas does ruin the cull for the season. But people are now experienced the damage and devastation of the crops or their ground, and they're actually coming on board. But I think probably that would be a good way to sort of start the ball rolling with problem areas, not blanket. I think blanket will not be a good thing for me financially.
And then I think sort of, just because I'm aware we of timeframes, etc., that we're working under. John, just interesting one, because there is obviously funding for deer management that's given to landowners, but I think what I'm trying to unpack here is the question of is that funding going in the right direction, and do you think that actually, if we were going to have a deer management strategy, it's all well and good to put the strategy down from above, but actually there's a lot of blockages which would prevent that strategy from being successful. Whether it's capacity in the market for venison, and actually could government rethink how they are spending money on deer management grants to actually ensure that we get the right outcomes. Now, whether that's just from what you were saying, Sandy, about funding doe culls for the fallow deer, is that a better way for money to be spent? And importantly, to come back into the pockets of the people who are actually having to spend the time and resources out on the ground managing the deer?
Well, I think it's quite a concern that money through the grant schemes actually gets to the coal face. I think that's what you're touching on there, View. And yeah, that's a real concern. I'm concerned with any strategy that's likely to come anyway. When you look at the consultation and how that was dealt with, it gets a little bit political, but the key stakeholders that entered that consultation were no more listened to than Fred in the shed, and I think that's worrying, because there's a lot of Fred in the sheds out there. So we have to be careful what we wish for, do we not? Because if we do get a national strategy that actually affects us all in areas that don't need to be affected. We have some good areas of deer management. We're probably a bit reluctant to actually praise ourselves in many areas. There are good deer populations that are well managed in different areas. Muntjac aren't a problem in some areas. In fact, they're very welcome in some areas. Fallow deer aren't a problem in some areas. My concern is that you mentioned the word sanctuary, and Floris, you mentioned there are areas you can't go. Well, there are a lot of areas we can't go, and that is the problem, particularly with fallow. Okay, sounds as if there's been some success, Sandy, in moving fallow deer off areas that are their welfare is sort of over the top, basically, and allowed to get a great density. One of the problems with fallow deer is they're not density sensitive. They don't reduce their reproduction because there's too many of them. They just keep breeding, and that's a concern. Whereas other species are a little bit different. So I am, as I say, I am the problem with a strategy that affects us all. I mean, for instance, the likelihood of the male season being totally lifted and no closed season for male deer. Well, that might be counterproductive, and a lot of people are thinking, well, if that's going to happen, we're going to educate all the does and the emphasis is going to be in the wrong direction. So I would say we have to be very careful in terms of any national big brother of a factory.
Well, in Holland we've got a few examples of unmanaged areas, and of course it was Holland is small and people want to shoot deer. Deer is very, very attractive. We even connect a serious money to deer. For instance, during the rut, the part of Holland where the rut takes place, every hotel, every B&B is filled. So it has an economic value, each deer. So there is a tendency to have as much deer as you want. And then we had a few areas where they didn't manage the deer, and that was a disaster, complete disaster. The fallow and the red deer, for starters, they ate everything. It was barren grounds. They started eating the trees. Everything was taken down. And first the red moved out because there was no food for them left. And eventually the fallow deer also went out. The roe deer died. But the rest of the environment was completely killed. So there were no butterflies, there was no undergrowth, there was nothing. So you really had barren grounds, and even there deer didn't want to live. Funny enough, the fallow deer could stay there the longest time. There was another area, a fenced area, big area in Holland. And there was the guy managing it, and he said, no, it's a natural habit. You should compare it to Africa. And we shouldn't kill beasts there. It should be a natural process. So each year, 1,100 deer, horses, altogether, horses, deer, and cows died there every year. And of course, the shooting community was furious, very opposed to it. But the naturalists were very happy about it because they said, no, this is how it should go. Luckily, in the end, they said, no, this is not how it should go, because the biodiversity completely went. There were no birds, there were no butterflies, the vegetation was gone. So I think you should have a scheme, whatever you like, and if it's managed from above, you can. In Holland, we like to, because Holland is small, we like to get the biggest area you can get, because animals don't know borders. And in Holland, we like to manage our own little plot, our own little estate, and like to see so many red deer, so many roe deer, so many, but they don't know the border, so they cross, and when your neighbor isn't shooting, all his deer will come to your grounds, and in the end, it's a massacre. That's the trouble.
Just one thing I'd like to add is it's not always about the numbers of deer that we're culling. So over the 3 years of our projects, we found that we had deer densities ranging from about 20 per square kilometre up to nearly 60 per square kilometre in the areas. And the High Weald is one of the most wooded parts of the country, so natural regeneration and woodland biodiversity was one of the key drivers. And whilst we have to accept if we want to reduce big populations of fallow, it is going to take a lot of time. It's not an overnight job. You're talking about maybe a decade to start getting to where we want to get. But actually, just that process of on a landscape scale having people contributed to deer management, it's much more naturalistic behaviour of the deer that we're seeing. So it's breaking up those big brooks. The deer aren't staying in the areas for as long. So we're actually seeing some biodiversity improvements, even though we haven't got the populations down to where maybe we'd like to see them. There's already those improvements because the deer are being pushed more as they would be with natural predators. So yeah, it's not always about the numbers.
That's great, thank you. I think now we're just going to move on to the subject of, I think, training and standards. I mean, I definitely believe we as a nation are very good on the whole at ensuring the welfare of deer is paramount in our approach to deer management. But there's obviously ever-growing pressure to meet higher cull targets. There's always a risk that welfare can become compromised. So I do think we need to continue to be vigilant in ensuring we're offering training that's relevant and clearly of the highest quality. But I think, again, just to sort of set this framework of this conversation, it would be interesting, Floris, just to hear what sort of, do you have any form of mandatory training in Holland if you're going to go out and manage deer?
In Holland, you're not allowed to touch a rifle without a training. So you need to do a year's course before you can shoot small animals and shoot roe deer. And when you want to shoot red deer and mostly fallow, you have to do another course which takes 3 years. So that's 2 theoretical years and 1 practical year. And the last year you're trained by an experienced stalker. And then you're allowed to go on your own or to shoot there on the whole. Yeah, so we couldn't think of, without training, you can't do anything in Holland. And your ticket is taken away very, very easily. So if you make the wrong move, if you don't attach the right, how do you call it, the yellow tag to the right animal, you're done. You can leave your hobby and go start fishing or something.
Okay, well, that's I mean, I think what you said doesn't surprise me, and it's what we hear goes on in most of Europe. And I think we're probably unique in Europe in terms of the fact that we essentially take a voluntary approach to training. But I'd be interested just to get the views of all the panelists on training and the importance of it on a voluntary basis relative to, would you want to see mandatory training coming into place?
Sorry,
I did think I was going to get them straight away. I'm in a pretty positive position up in Scotland, in that Scottish government are very pro paying for wild deer best practice events and guidance development, which makes my job really easy because that's the first hurdle already removed. I've got some money. I've got a great cohort of stalkers in Scotland, from top to bottom, that attend events. They're really keen. They are prepared to drive 3 or 4 hours to come to a best practice event and then 3 or 4 hours back. Sometimes it involves extra cost to them because they have to organise accommodation, but they want to do it. There's such a willingness to want to improve their own skills and their own knowledge, which I think is really, really commendable. I know that there's a number of best practice events that have been taking place in England over the last 12 months as well. And if you're getting sell-out events, I can't do enough in Scotland. I wish that my role was 100% wild deer best practice because, if I could get that extra time to deliver it, we could be putting on a huge programme. I mean, already we're doing pretty well and it's very well supported. So, yeah, when it comes to training, I think if you actually want to maybe take a full survey of people that are involved in deer management, I don't think too many would be against actually doing some form of training.
Well, this mandatory training, mandatory qualifications, personally, I'm against the idea, and I'll tell you why. It's going to be counterproductive to what we want to do in the UK. If we want to manage deer more effectively in the future, introduce a mandatory training is going to restrict the people that are going to manage the deer, and that's a big problem. And apart from that, why would you want to try and put something right when it's not broken? Because our system isn't broken, Hugh. It's very much an excellent example of self-regulatory body. When you look at all you people in the audience and in these halls, you're all here voluntarily. Nobody's forced you unless you're on a panel out here to come here. And I think that's a great example. And I think from a training point of view, we're ahead of the game. So much so that we've withstood for a number of years now any mandatory requirement. Okay, you could say, well, there's a bit of a backdoor way to that by some police forces. insisting on certain qualifications, but that's not mandatory. It's probably a good thing, encouraging people to get some qualification, and to be fair, most people that use firearms would be very supportive of some mandatory training requirement, a basic safety requirement, but I would warn against it. It's going to be counterproductive.
I think a majority of stalkers that I know have voluntarily done some sort of training, whether it be DSC or PDS. And I know where we've provided courses such as sort of rollicking and inspection to provide best practice, we've been inundated with people that want to do it. And these are experienced guys that are putting stuff through game dealers that are still happy to come and pick up a little tip here and there. You know, talking about training and deer welfare, I think one of the main issues is gamekeepers now demanding more head and neck shot deer. And I think that's putting pressure on people to do that. So, you know, maybe we should look at training the gamekeepers about, game dealers about what they should be requiring for their venison. But there's a lot of good training out there, and a majority of people involved in deer stalking are more than willing to do it. And I think if we're trying to push that, we're better off doing it in a voluntary way of providing that training to be as accessible and affordable as possible to people.
Training is important. I think it starts at the roots, basically, whether it's your minder, your mentor, you first go with your first stalk, or you go and do a BAS course or do another one of the organisation courses. But I think it's something to enhance, especially if you're applying for your first firearm, if you're getting a variation, anything to basically prove that you're doing anything professionally, I think helps, and helps the whole industry. I think there's a few sort of like areas that could be improved on, but I think in a whole, I think everybody's actually, you know, I bet most people here today actually have done a course, going to do a course, or actually generally interested in it, because it's not just about getting a certificate, but actually interested to go to the course, meet some new people, and actually probably learn something. That's what I found anyway. So no, I think it's a good thing. We've done quite a few like training days for beginners just on simulated targets, which I think work really well. It just gets guys out there like used to putting the trigger on a silhouette rather than a round gong. But I think any form of training is a good thing.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's really interesting to hear all your views, because I wouldn't disagree with any of them, because I do think we are, as a sector, really good at wanting to improve ourselves. And I think we see that desire in terms of what you were just talking about, Sandy. I was involved in our local group with 2B in wildlife, and we just saw there was a huge demand from people involved in deer management to actually get practical physical training. And I think, you know, that's I suppose the next question, which I don't know if any of you could provide the answer, but you know, it's brilliant. People go out, they do DSC 1, DSC 2, but as we all know, you know, there's a great starting point, but it's the opportunities for experience, and that's the real challenge. And as we all know, in too many cases, to get experience, it's expensive. And how do we find a way to get people experience in a way, which is cost effective? And maybe, Paul, you were saying, you know, just in terms of shooting experience, you know, doing those sorts of days with you or other organisations, not just to plug for you, Paul. But then also, I mean, do we not all need to look at doing more to give people hands-on experience? I don't know if, you know, how do you get, you know, clearly one of the things we hear about is carcass handling, you know, because it then becomes a food product. And if we are going to stand any chance, and we'll talk more about this at the panel tomorrow, but to improve venison sales in this country, we need to improve standards. But, you know, how do we get people the opportunity to physically get their hands on the carcass and be taught? You know, I think this is where we all as a sector probably need to work much better together to get more people more experience. But I don't know if any of the panel have ideas or thoughts on that. I mean,
Well, again, here's Holland again, small and over-regulated, but we've got a course for carcass handling, and you're not allowed to sell an animal to a game dealer unless you're a qualified person. And to become a qualified person, you have to take some lessons, a few evenings. It's not that long, not that difficult, but you have to recognize, for starters, several diseases. And of course, you have to know how to open a beast and how to, for instance, clean it. I don't know if it's an issue here in this group, but when I was young, we used to clean animals, get the hose out and rinse them properly, because then they were looking properly. Well, in Holland it's completely forbidden now. Water shouldn't be used on any animal anymore now. So there you are. And there's another thing I want to emphasize, that in I don't know how it is in the UK, but in Holland we're under a magnifying glass. The shooting people are really under a magnifying glass. And the antis are taking every opportunity to sable us down. And that's why training and all these, well, extras are becoming quite handy, because we all can say, no, we're trained, we're specialized, we can do that. Yes.
Now, Floris, you clearly before we left the union, you stole that regulatory bit, that mandatory requirement before you were supplying venison into the food chain. So you seem to have done well from us. The problem we've got here, Floris particularly, is that whilst there are all these safeguards with food hygiene and trained hunter status supplying the main dealers, there is a big loophole. Because you look at the game meat guide, Fred in the shed can still supply direct to the final consumer small quantities without any qualifications at all. So we've still the potential for the hotel clients to be poisoned overnight.
Well, they had a nice meal.
You're right, but I bet everybody in this room have got pride of what they shoot, and it's granite, and it's put out, and it's hung up, and it looks the part. And I find a lot of stalkers, and I've been to a lot of countries, and I've seen a lot of very, very, very interesting growlicking and meat handling. And I would say that the UK and Scotland are really good, to be fair, are really good at their meat hygiene and their carcass prep.
Just a couple of things about getting more people access to get out and stalk. So where we've set up these deer management groups and we've got more people working together, it's raised awareness for the landowners as to what they want, to achieve through deer management. And it's one of the problems before was you're frightened to take somebody else or mentor somebody because you think they're going to try and nick your bit of ground. It's all about building relationships and trust. So where we've got these groups working, they're now taking people forward that are interested in participating and bringing those on, and especially, I know myself now. I've got a bit older. If I've got someone younger with me to help Labithafis about, I'm more than happy to help mentor somebody. So there are opportunities there, but I think maybe I know there's a little bit goes on, but the public forest estate surely should be able to provide more opportunities for people to access affordable stalking. But also there seems to be, I think, a lot of pressure on people not to charge for taking people out stalking. You should be able to. There's absolutely nothing wrong with making money out of taking people out to shoot deer. And that's one way of funding your deer management. And, you ought to applaud that, not put people down for it.
Can I just add, when it comes to certainly what we talk about carcass handling and standard of carcasses that are going into game dealers, something that's been raised a few times recently with me in Scotland is the quality of the carcasses. There are a number of, everyone here will have their own views on their game dealer, and quite often some game dealers will try and reduce how much they are prepared to pay for the carcass, depending on damage. But what some of the feedback did come from a number of game dealers was based on the fact that the carcass handling, the standards were poor. and the carcasses were poor quality, they're dirty. These were individuals that now can't settle to that game dealer, and they are level 2 qualified. Some of them apparently were AWs as well, with witnesses. So do we need to have refresher training? You know, some of these individuals did their DSC1, their large game handling, was part of their DSC1 15, 20 years ago. But, you know, if they're not taking it upon themselves to keep themselves up to date with standards by coming to best practice events, how do these people ensure that they're creating carcasses and putting them into the food chain that are of the right standard?
Because they won't last. They won't be able to sell the deer. It's like it's self-policing. A lot of these things are self-policing. Saying you're managing a deer on the ground is self-policing. And I think it is important to have a refresher course, or I think basically we could talk all day about game prices and hunting prices. But I think, a lot of the time it's actually, if the game dealers raw, you touched on the neck and head shots. It is important to them to get the best amount of meat, but they obviously can't hit your cull target if you're just doing that. So it is a long conversation, and I'm not going to talk about it.
Chicken. I think we're going to sort of wrap it up here, but more importantly, just to have questions from any of the audience. But just before we do that, it would just be interesting just to get a view from those of you who've been listening. Just if there were high quality, hands-on, I mean, like this best practice days, but other more specific focused training courses for continuous professional development, call it what you will. But I mean, would you feel that you'd be interested in going on these courses? I'd just love to be interested to see a show of hands from everyone here. Yeah, which is great to see, because I do believe that we, on a voluntary basis, want best advice, and we're following that, which is fantastic. I'm going to throw it open to the floor. I might have to move very fast. You're not getting the first question in, because I'm sure I won't like that.
Afternoon, everybody. I've just got 2 questions. Well, one's more a statement, and I'll leave the thought with everybody in the room. But the first one, I'm part of Cow Deer Management Group on the West Coast, work with the organisers here that we all know. And we have a regular attendance by NatureScot. It's no secret that mandatory training is coming in Scotland. But a lot of topic is funding. You want us to decrease the deer density, but there's a cost associated with that. FLS, Forestry Land Scotland, Forestry England, they are heavily subsidised with the game dealer and what price they get from Highland Game. So there's got to be a contribution, whichever way you look at it, whether it's training, whether it's the venison price, and as you say, we could chat all day about that. But certainly mandatory training, I'm all for that. A lot of the members will be, and have already gone through it. But in order to get that encouragement and bring people through, they need assistance. And ScotGov has to step up, both in terms of training, sponsorship, availability. NatureScot, I'm the chap that helped bring in sporting races in Scotland. I'm ex-assessor. I jumped from one side to the other. NatureScot have a lot of land holdings and significant land holdings that they could give access to a training scheme and sponsor trainee stalkers, etc., and rads and bring them through. But it's a question of cost. But the cost, when you look at the overall picture, is insignificant to what the obligations that they're looking to impose now. And as we all know, with the first Section 8 being exercised. And the second one I just want to leave is, who regulates the game dealers? We're heavily regulated and expected to deliver it through our training, but who regulates the game dealers? Because I'm sure everybody in this room has got a lot of stories about game dealers and mischief that goes on. It's a very murky world.
We've got a game dealer coming tomorrow, so you can ask that question again. Ian.
Thanks, Hugh. Thanks, panel. My name's Ian Bell. I'm Chief Exec of BAS, and I'm also Vice President of the European Hunting Association. Just adding to your conversation there, so we are all for self-regulation and lots of training. And in some of the areas we've talked about, we've already been talking about how we up our game. As far as mandatory and imposed regulation, I just want to pose a question to everyone. When did you last see any regulation from any of our governments or from the EU that gave us more freedoms as opposed to telling us what we can't do? So where we look for mandatory elements enforced by government, we just need to be careful what we get, because they're not going to ask us. They're going to ask us and loads of other people. So my line and the line of the organisation that I represent is it's all about self-regulation. It's all about demonstrating massively high standards, but not asking to be regulated. And just one quick follow-on point for that. I'm already having discussions with the licensing element of Nature Scotland, where they are looking, so mandatory regulation for deer stalking, not yet in, but coming. They're already looking at how they can expand that beyond deer and into other areas of shooting. I'm not sure we want that, but you might. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. The idea is to ask, if you want, questions to the panel. So if anyone has questions to the panel on any subject.
Hello there, I'm Alison. I wanted to ask, it was quite clear from the audience that there's appetite for more practical training, and a lot of people in here will be qualified to the same level. But then this kind of appetite for mandatory training and people in here wanting more practical training, it sort of seems that there's not the confidence in the training that we already have, both sort of people that are on the ground and tap people in government as well. How do you think we can bridge that gap? I know certainly as someone who would be looking for that kind of practical training, it's difficult to know exactly how to sort the sheep from the goats, if you will. So, have you got any sort of suggestions of how we can play that better?
Anyone want to take that?
Well, there is a couple of good schemes, mentoring schemes actually, both Dusker mentoring scheme and the BDS did, for people to get in touch with qualified stalkers and be taken on and get mentored in that way. I'm not so sure as there's a lack of practical training. Certainly when it comes to firearm safety and shooting test situations, you can't do that online. It's got to be practical. And there is, there are the qualifications and the training providers are out there that do provide practical training. Maybe the training providers should offer some basic rifle skill training, short of, say, the DSC-1. But certainly, within the DSC-1, you've got the shooting test and you've got the practical element. DSC-2 is all practical, really. But of course, it's quite possible for somebody to achieve DSC-2 and only have shot one deer in their life. And that is a problem in terms of people looking at experienced people to take on, probably to achieve a license to shoot somewhere or take a lease. They're looking for the qualifications. There's the individual offering the DSC-1, DSC-2 with little experience. It's merely a stepping stone. And I like to use the comparison of the driving test. When you pass your driving test, if you're lucky, first time, you're pretty dangerous for quite a while. And you're pretty dangerous if you haven't had a retest for 30 years as well. So at both ends of the scale, there's an issue. And of course, that leads us back to continuous professional development, whether we shall be introducing more training and more courses to keep people's skills up to press.
Just to be clear, I haven't lost my driving license. I know John looked to be in that way, but I haven't. I think it's quite interesting, just touching on the point that you made, Paul, and Louise also raised about venison carcasses. I do think that's one of the things we do need. Maybe slightly drawing on what you were saying about who regulates the game dealers. Yeah, we need, if quality is poor, it needs to get rejected, because that is the only way people will learn. And it's no good if they can just get rid of carcasses to the game dealer, which are of poor quality. So, I do think there needs to be a bit of a rethink on that approach, but that's for the game dealers. But it's sort of heartening to hear that people, that there is a desire for voluntary training and improvement, because I think that's what we all want to continue to ensure that we are doing, that we're delivering best practice. Welfare of deer is paramount when we're managing them, and that ultimately, we're producing a really high quality product, because as we all know, we'll be talking more about this tomorrow, and we need to be able to sell more venison in this country if we're going to be able to manage a higher cull. And there's a myriad of ways we're going to do that, but most important is quality. So I think if there are any more questions from the floor, yeah.
Thanks, Hugh. Yeah, I have got a list. Well, I won't go through too many of them. I think tomorrow might be. But about quality. So most people know me. Paul, you know me, a few of you. I set up a scheme with supermarket. And I think the issue is that shop placement's a big thing. It's not in my remit, but I don't quite understand why they allow a 4-inch bull to be a good enough target. In my field of practice where I have, an inch bull is only satisfactory. So if you think of 4-inch bull, and then the variance of that can be 8 inches, and that's where we get damage of carcass. So our standard that I teach, supplying the supermarket for about 20 different areas of about 3,000 carcasses, our shop placement is only an inch. So if there's any variance on that, it's only 2 to 3 inches. So that's one thing maybe where we can improve a little bit on standard practice. Also, when we have a carcass that's not shot well, the supermarket, every carcass is looked at quality, and if there's a bad carcass, pictures are taken everywhere, and if it's bad placement, those pictures are sent to the stalker, and then the stalker is talked to by me or the supermarket. We don't get this from the game dealers. They're not learning at all, and a lot of stalkers are used to just selling skin on carcasses and not actually seeing where the shop placement is. I can talk about this, but I think it's education. I also do a mentorship. I know Paul does as well. And I think, like you said, there's a lot more, like we said, the driving license, it just gets you through it. I think we should do more mentorships, because that's exactly where you learn. If I'm doing 40 carcasses in a day, I teach people, just to do the legs or just to do the head. So instinctively, they get really good at those one things, rather than just doing 2 or 3 carcasses every so often. They're never getting any better. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Union. Any questions from anyone else?
Hi there. I just wanted to ask a question regarding the prevalence of head and neck shooting and also extended range shooting. Ultimately, we know that this is something that is more prevalent, particularly with the increase in cull targets. We're seeing more and more people choosing to take extended range shots, and the game dealers are asking for head and neck shooting. Is this not placing this in a more underground sea, where people are having to teach themselves rather than being educated in proper places? Why are we seeing organisations shying away from this, refusing to take up the mantle of providing proper training on this?
Yeah, I think just as I was saying as well, the only reason they've been asking for head and neck shot is because placement's so poor in a chest shot. I think we need to educate people on better. They don't even know where the heart is, a lot of people. So we need to maybe training again. That's the only, I spoke to all the den dealers, and the only reason head and neck shot is because of poor placement.
Right, so I'm brave enough to take the microphone. Yeah, it is an issue, and it is an issue with venison. I mean, I deal with a lot of smaller deer, so heart shots are not a problem, because the front end, there's not much venison on it, so it's basically the loin, the back straps, and the haunch. When you're trying to basically produce big numbers, head and neck shot probably isn't the best, because part shot, you need to get the shots off to get the animals on the deck. So as anyone in shop fellow do, if you shoot one in the head, the rest will go. Whereas if you shoot them in the heart, you'll get that second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth up, whatever it is.
So I think that's probably, it's a difficult one really, because I think if you can try and have a certain amount which are cleanly shot, and the second amount which are not quite as well shot, and have the sale for the second amount to the private sales or the people that take them off you, and then you have the higher end which goes straight to the game dealer. I've been processing for a lot of years now, but about 6-7 years ago, the game dealer I think they had a problem with muntjac and Chinese water deer, and basically they're only giving 25 pence, 50 pence a kilo, and they basically refuse them because it's just a small carcass, meat bone density is so poor. So I took it on myself, and basically we skin and process all the Chinese water deer and muntjac, and we're due this year just short of 700 Chinese water deer and about 250, 300 muntjac. And I find a home for them. I don't have a problem, but it is a lot of work. I think with the fallow deer situation, I think what would be quite a good idea in my mind was there'd be a subsidy from a government to a game dealer, that they would pay a game dealer X amount, which would go on to the stalker. But then everybody knows if there's value in something, it works. So fallow deer, if a fallow deer is worth £80 instead of £40, I can tell you now, they'll be shot, because somebody's going out and shooting one, they'll shoot 3 or 4. But as long as it's done correctly, so on and so on. But that's my take on it.
So one of the other things we've done is work with the Country Food Trust. So we know we've got too many fallow deer, and there's a lot of people in food poverty in our area. So we've got together and we have focused just on fallow does. But this year, the High Weald supplied them with 750 fallow does. That entire carcass was going to mince, which might break your heart a little bit, but it was going to mince, and then that mince was either going to make up their ready meals or going into into food kitchens and places that need it. And the stalker was guaranteed from the very start of the season to the very end a fixed price per kilo, which is around £2 per kilo. That wasn't going to change at all. So when you go out shooting how much you're going to get back for your carcass. And again, they're only accepting suitable carcasses, so it had to be fit for purpose. But as Paul said, if you're getting a decent return, there's plenty of people, as we can see from this room, who are willing to go out and shoot deer. So, we between us, we have got a means of getting to grips with our deer population, and hopefully the government can recognise that and support us all to do it.
Could you want?
Yeah.
Just
headshots and neck shots, it sounds so easy, and I always hope that game dealers are stalkers themselves, because I think animal welfare should always prevail above food. And when you shoot a beast badly, we always can do something with it. We can eat it ourselves. You can, in a bad situation, you can even feed the dogs with it. They have a nice day. But I think, they're all very experienced gentlemen here, and probably here in the audience as well. We have seen lower jaws being shot off. I've even seen upper jaws being shot off, filled with heather and very, very nasty. So I would strongly oppose to head and neck shots because of the meat. Another thing is, and that's interesting in Holland, what we now do in our shooting community is when we shoot a beast, a poor beast, or we shoot it poorly, then we just leave it in the wood. And it's very interesting how it improves the biodiversity again. So especially the bottom life is enormously increased for the better by a carcass being left there. And it's gone in a week, absolutely. And you see all interesting beetles and, well, I can go on with it. But welfare, very important.
And I think that's a very good note to finish on. I'm afraid we're out of time, ladies and gentlemen, but first of all, thank you all very much for coming along, listening, contributing. Floris, Louise, John, Sandy, Paul, thank you all very much for being our panelists. And we'll call it a wrap. Yeah.
So again, I'm going to apologise for the audio. Hopefully you were able to listen and it wasn't too bad. I am sure it has raised many questions, and we will, as I said at the beginning of this podcast, we will try to dig to the bottom of them. If there are questions you have, please feel free to drop me an email. It's peter@theoutdoorgibbon.com, or you can get in touch with the BDS as well and ask them those questions directly. But stay tuned, because Sunday we talk about venison and everything to go with that. Anyway, we'll catch you on the next one.